The grocery bill is rising again, but the price on the receipt is only the final signal from a much larger system. For many American households, the grocery bill is one of the clearest measures of economic pressure. It arrives every week in the same aisles at the same checkout counters on the same receipts. When prices move higher, families feel it quickly because food is not optional. In April 2026, grocery prices began rising again after being unchanged in March. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the food index rose 0.5% in April. The Food at Home Index, which measures grocery store purchases, rose 0.7%. Food away from home rose 0.2%. Over the previous 12 months, food at home was up 2.9%. The broader food index was up 3.2%. Food away from home was up 3.6%. Those increases may be lower than the sharpest inflation spikes of recent years, but groceries are different from many other expenses. They are repeated, necessary, and paid from the same budget that also covers housing, energy, insurance, transportation, and debt. That is why the grocery bill matters. It is not only a food story, it is a cost of living story. Behind every grocery receipt is a long chain of costs. Farms, feed, fertilizer, processing, packaging, refrigeration, trucking, warehouses, distribution centers, store labor, energy, and retail operations all sit between the farm and the kitchen table. When pressure builds in several parts of that chain, the result can appear in the grocery aisle. The April 2026 data showed that the pressure was not evenly spread across every item. 5 of the 6 major grocery store food groups increased during the month. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs rose 1.3%. Beef rose 2.7%. Fruits and vegetables rose 1.8%. Non-alcoholic beverages rose 1.1%. Dairy rose 0.8%. Cereals and bakery products rose 0.1%. The only major grocery category that fell was other food at home, down 0.4%. That difference matters because households do not buy one single item called food. They buy meat, vegetables, coffee, milk, bread, beverages, and other specific products. Each category has its own supply chain, cost pressures, and price movements. A family that buys more fresh produce or beef may experience the increase differently from a household with a different mix of items. A retiree on a fixed income may feel the same increase differently from a working household with more flexibility. Grocery inflation is not experienced evenly. It is experienced repeatedly. The annual numbers show that the pressure had not disappeared. For the 12 months ending April 2026, fruits and vegetables were up 6.1%. Non-alcoholic beverages were up 5.1%. Cereals and bakery products rose 2.6%. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs rose 1.5%. Dairy fell 0.6%. That is one reason the grocery story can feel uneven. Some categories rise quickly, others rise slowly, some fall. But the total bill can still feel higher when the items rising fastest are items people buy often. The United States Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service also expected food prices to keep rising in 2026. In its April 2026 forecast, USDA projected overall food prices to rise 2.9% for the year. Food at home prices were forecast to rise 2.4%. Food away from home prices were forecast to rise 3.6%. The forecast does not mean every item will rise at the same pace. USDA said several grocery categories were expected to grow faster than their 20-year historical averages, including beef and veal, fish and seafood, fresh vegetables, processed fruits and vegetables, sugar and sweets, non-alcoholic beverages, and other foods. At the same time, USDA expected some categories, including eggs, dairy products, and fats and oils, to decline in 2026. That is the more precise picture. Grocery pressure is real, but it is not uniform. The system behind the grocery bill begins well before food reaches the shelf. USDA explains that farm-level and wholesale-level prices give a general sense of price movements across different stages of the U.S. food supply chain. Retail food prices do not always move at the same time as farm or wholesale prices. There is usually a lag because food passes through several stages before consumers buy it. A tomato is not only a farm product by the time it reaches a store. It has been harvested, packed, cooled, transported, stored, placed on shelves, and sold through a retail operation. A package of beef reflects cattle supply, processing, refrigeration, transportation, labor, packaging, and retail handling. A beverage may reflect ingredients, packaging, global commodity prices, transportation, and store costs. A grocery receipt is not just a list of food prices. It is a record of supply chain costs reaching the consumer. Fuel and freight are part of that chain. In May 2026, the Energy Information Administration listed the U.S. on-highway diesel price at $5.63.9 per gallon. That was $2.16.3 higher than a year earlier. Diesel matters because it powers much of the trucking and distribution system that moves food across the country. It is connected to farming equipment, refrigerated trailers, freight networks, warehouses, and store deliveries. The U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index also showed pressure in transportation. In the first quarter of 2026, shipper spending rose 12.9% from the previous quarter and 21.8% from a year. ERLIER U.S. Bank said the increase reflected tighter capacity, higher rates, and rising fuel surcharges. That does not mean diesel alone caused grocery prices to rise. The data does not support such a simple explanation. It does show that transportation costs were elevated during the same period grocery prices were rising again. For consumers, the trucking bill is not visible at checkout. The fuel surcharge does not appear as a separate line on the grocery receipt. Still, those costs are part of the system that brings food to the store. When freight becomes more expensive, someone in the chain has to absorb the cost, reduce expenses elsewhere, or pass some of it forward. That is how a cost that begins on the highway can eventually become part of the grocery bill. Energy matters in other ways as well. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the energy index rose 3.8% in April and 17.9% over the previous 12 months. Energy affects food through production, processing, refrigeration, transportation, and store operations. A grocery store depends on electricity for refrigeration and lighting. A warehouse needs energy to keep food cold. A processor uses power and fuel. A truck depends on diesel. The food system is physical, and physical goods require energy to move and preserve. Energy does not explain every food price increase. It is one of several pressures that can move through the system. The same is true of category-specific supply issues. USDA reported that farm-level cattle prices were 16.2% higher in March 2026 than in March 2025. USDA also noted that a cyclical contraction of the cattle herd had resulted in tight cattle supplies. That helps explain why beef deserves attention. BLS reported that beef rose 2.7% in April 2026. USDA also expected beef and veal to rise faster than their 20-year historical average in 2026. The chain is direct. Tighter cattle supplies can place pressure on farm-level prices. Higher farm-level prices can move through processing and wholesale markets. Over time, part of that pressure can appear in retail beef prices. For families, the result is a more expensive item in the cart. Fresh vegetables follow a different pattern. USDA noted that vegetable prices can move because of weather, production, seasonality, and other factors. BLS reported that fruits and vegetables rose 1.8% in April and were up 6.1% over the previous 12 months. Produce is a basic grocery category. A rise in fruits and vegetables does not feel like a luxury price increase. It affects everyday meals. Non-alcoholic beverages also showed pressure. BLS reported the category rose 1.1% in April and 5.1% over the YEA or USDA said non-alcoholic beverages were among the categories expected to rise faster than their 20-year historical averages in 2026. And noted that higher global coffee prices were part of the pressure. For households, these category movements become choices in the aisle. A family may buy less beef, switch brands, choose different produce, or reduce restaurant meals and rely more on groceries, but those adjustments have limits. Food is essential, and it cannot be removed from the budget. That is why grocery inflation carries a different weight from many other price changes. A person can delay buying a new appliance. A family can postpone a vacation. A household can cut back on entertainment. Groceries still have to be bought again and again. Even when the increase is moderate, the repetition makes it important. The current grocery picture also sits inside a larger cost stack. In April 2026, BLS reported that food, energy, and shelter all increased. Households do not experience grocery prices in isolation. The grocery bill is paid from the same income that covers rent or mortgage payments, gasoline, electricity, insurance, car payments, credit cards, and other debt. When food rises at the same time as other essentials, the pressure becomes harder to manage. The issue is not only that groceries cost more. It is that groceries are rising inside a budget already being pulled in several directions. For middle-class households, that can change how money is spent. A larger grocery bill may leave less money for savings. It may delay repairs, it may increase reliance on credit, it may reduce spending on restaurant meals, travel, or other flexible expenses. For fixed-income households, the pressure can be sharper because income may not adjust quickly enough to cover repeated increases in essentials. For small businesses, the same chain of costs can appear from the other side. Restaurants, food retailers, delivery businesses, and local stores may face higher food, freight, energy, and labor-related costs. Some absorb the increases. Some raise prices. Others change menus, suppliers, package sizes, or operations. Consumers see the final price. Businesses see the cost structure behind it. That is why food away from home matters in this story. BLS reported restaurant prices rose 0.2% in April and 3.6% over the previous 12 months. USDA also forecast food away from home prices to rise 3.6% in 2026. Restaurant food and grocery food are different categories, but households often move between them. When restaurant meals become more expensive, some families shift more meals home. When groceries also rise, the pressure follows them there. The result is a broader food cost problem, not one cause. Not one company, not one simple explanation. A system of costs moving through the places where Americans buy food. The recent history of food inflation helps explain why the issue still feels significant. USDA reported that food prices increased 9.9% in 2022, the fastest annual increase since 1979. Food at home prices increased 11.4% that year, while food away from home prices increased 7.7%. USDA identified avian influenza, the Russia-Ukraine war, and economy-wide inflationary pressures such as high energy costs as contributors. Food price growth slowed after that. In 2023, USDA said supply chain issues, wholesale food prices, and economy-wide inflationary factors eased from 2022. Food at home prices still rose 5.0%, while food away from home prices rose 7.1%. In 2024 and 2025, food prices rose 2.3% and 2.9%. Food at home prices rose 1.2% in 2024 and 2.3% in 2025. Food away from -o rose 4.1% in 2024 and 3.8% in 2025. By 2026, the pace was lower than the sharpest year of the inflation surge. But the household frustration remained understandable. Families do not experience inflation only as a year-over-year percentage. They experience the price level left behind after several years of increases. A slower increase still adds to a higher base. That is why a 0.7% monthly rise in grocery prices can matter. It comes after years in which food became more expensive. The grocery bill is not resetting. It is building on what came before. This is also why food is only part of the story. The grocery bill includes food, but it also reflects cattle supply, crop conditions, global commodities, wholesale prices, energy, diesel, freight capacity, packaging, refrigeration, warehouses, store operations, and the timing of price changes through the supply chain. No single factor explains all of it. The verified data points to multiple pressures. BLS confirmed that grocery prices rose again in April. USDA Forecast continued food price increases in 2026. EIA showed diesel prices above $5.60 per gallon in mid-May. U.S. Bank reported sharply higher shipper spending in the first quarter. USDA identified category-specific pressures in beef, fresh vegetables, and non-alcoholic beverages. Together, those facts describe a grocery system where costs are still moving. For households, the impact is simple even when the system is complex. The same cart costs more. The same receipt takes more of the budget. The same weekly trip becomes harder to ignore. A grocery receipt is small enough to hold in one hand, but it carries the weight of a much larger economic system. It begins with farms and inputs. It moves through processing and wholesale markets. It depends on trucks, diesel, warehouses, cold storage, and retail operations. It ends at the checkout counter where a household decides what stays in the cart and what goes back on the shelf. As of the April 2026 CPI release, grocery prices were rising again after being unchanged in March. Food at home rose 0.7% for the month and 2.9% over the year. Food away from home rose 0.2% for the month and 3.6% over the year. USDA expected food prices to continue rising in 2026, with overall food up 2.9%, grocery prices up 2.4%, and restaurant prices up 3.6%. What remains uncertain is how much of the next wave of grocery pressure will come from farm supply, diesel and freight, energy costs, weather, retailer margins, global commodity markets, or consumer demand. That uncertainty matters. It is why the story should be handled carefully. It would be misleading to say diesel alone is driving the grocery bill. It would also be misleading to say all food categories are rising equally. Some categories are rising quickly, some are rising slowly, some are falling. The accurate story is more measured, but still important. Groceries are rising again, the pressure is uneven, and the causes extend beyond food itself. For ordinary Americans, the grocery receipt is not only a record of what they bought. It is a signal from the systems behind everyday costs. When farms, freight, fuel, warehouses, and retailers face higher costs, the effects can move through the supply chain and reach the family budget. That is the hidden cost inside the grocery bill. For households already managing housing, energy, insurance, transportation, and debt, even a modest increase at the checkout counter can become part of a much larger squeeze.